myself, Anna Walsh of Theatre Forum, and Irma McLaughlin, who's in the window next to me on my screen at least. I took a very deep breath as I unmuted myself, because this is our first digital forum, but it's also our first event that has probably exceeded 500 people attending a Theatre Forum event for many, many years. In fact, it may be our biggest event ever. We're very happy to be co-producing this event with the Space team, who you will see and hear from during the next few days, and also for the generosity of Michael Barker-Cavan and all of our speakers and contributors over the next few days. It is a modular event with you being able to choose all of the sessions that suit you over the next 2 days. Each session has been designed with presentations, discussions, and an opportunity for you to ask questions of speakers, and also to finish the session with the foyer type experience that you might have at a Theatre Forum event, speaking to friends and colleagues also attending the session. We ask you to observe the usual Zoom protocols of staying on mute, using the chat, and we'll bring you in with that sort of well-known and maybe overused expression of waving at you and telling you that you're still on mute. There is a captioning option available, and if you would like to use the closed caption option, you'll find a button on the bottom of your screen. It's to the right-hand side on the bottom of your screen. But welcome to the Digital Forum. We're very excited and interested in where this will take us. And over to you, Julie, and best of luck to all of us.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everybody. The sun is shining where I am, and I hope you have a little bit of sunshine where you are too. I'm Julie. I'm the Artistic Director at Mermaid Arts Centre in Wicklow and the Chair of Theatre Forum. And there's a palpable excitement, I think, this morning because there are so many of us registered to engage with these sessions this morning and tomorrow morning. I think for us, Theatre Forum really is about the strength of its membership, and that so many people would be kind of make themselves available to engage with these sessions over the next couple of days really gives us a sense of the community out there, I suppose, and we really do believe that, you know, we're stronger together and that we can build a better performing arts sector together. So really welcome to all of you, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Thanks to Anna and Irma at Theatre Forum, to our colleagues at the Space, and to all the contributors for joining us. If there's any, I guess, maybe overriding tone over the next couple of days, or even the few months that have led up to this event, I suppose it's about setting the terms for how we move forward into this more hybrid future, I guess. I think I for one anyway, have been a person who at the very beginning in the first lockdown was rigidly opposed to doing anything on digital unless I absolutely had to. But over time, and maybe some of you are the same, I've woken up a little bit to the opportunities that are held within that, and also to the sense of democratization that it offers as well. I think it's no accident that there are more people than ever attending this event than we've ever had at an in-person conference. So that's hugely thrilling as well. So I don't want to say too much more, but to say thank you again to everybody for organising, and thank you for joining us, and hope you enjoy the next few days. And do stay in touch with us. You know, let's keep the conversation going, because I suppose we're really in a situation where we're learning from each other as we go. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Julie, and welcome to everyone who's joining us here today online. I think the scale of today's incredible turnout, as Julie says, speaks volume for the potential and the challenges that face us all. Because while this reflects, I think, the enormous interest in this emerging art form right across the sector, it also hints at the great unknown that all of us face, and as a result of the radically and drastically changing circumstances of this new so-called reality normal, and that the pressure to react has been enormous on everyone. And many of you here have already taken up this gauntlet, and with great courage and determination. But in some ways, there lies the rub, the challenge. For what in truth are we basing this reaction on? The pressure to do something, anything, to leap into a whirlpool online, make your mark, allowing no time or space to really question the why, the how, the where, and most importantly, perhaps the who for. What knowledge base and strategically derived purpose are we basing all these choices on? We hope that over the next 2 days, we'll go some way to help you slam on some of those brakes, take a deep breath, and begin to truly question many of the assumptions around the digital arena, and most importantly, really explore some truly fundamental questions, including, is this really what I want to be doing? Am I being forced online against all my better instincts? Am I ready to make this jump in thinking and in practice? That's why in mid-2020, the Civic began a process of questions first, answers later. That's leading to the formation of what we call Project Protean, which will be a homegrown mechanism by which to dig down into some of these questions and to forge a genuinely grounded and sustainable support mechanism for Irish theatre artists, particularly independent artists and smaller companies who willingly wish to work in this arena. A key partner in this process has been The Space, a digital agency established 6 or more years ago before this current crisis began by Arts Council England and the BBC to help promote digital engagement across the arts and cultural sector. And I think more than 300 commissions later and case studies to boot, you'll now hear from The Space's CEO, Fiona Morris, who indeed will tell you, yes, indeed, lessons have been and can be learned, but no, there is no magic book. No one-stop set of solutions, no fixed right and wrong. So don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And taking as her first step, an overview of some of the experiences and learnings The Space has gathered from working with a wide range of arts organizations, large and small. Fiona, you're very welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Great to have so many of you here today. And I think, as everyone so far has said, I think it's a mark of the times that we are in, that everyone is considering what digital means for them. We do have a very short trailer, which is just a minute long, of some of the projects that we've worked on in the last kind of 18 months. And we're going to try and play it because I've got some other video links later on in the presentation, and what I don't want to do is to use them later and discover that you're all struggling with broadband bandwidth today. So we can put them as links in the chat and not play them as part of the presentation, but we thought we'd start by playing you the trailer. If you can then let us know in the comments whether that is playing okay for you, that would be brilliant. So thanks, Sam, if you can play the trailer.
Right, can I just kindly ask, I think there's been an annotation put on the screen, if it can be just removed, is that all right? Just off the screen, sorry. If you can all see, there's like a scribble on the screen. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Oh yeah. The joys of digital, I don't know.
Yeah, so if anybody did do that by mistake, if you could just kindly remove, otherwise I'll thank you. Thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you. I can see various comments from various people to say it's jumpy. So I will, thank you. We will put them in, we'll put links in the chat as well. So if you want to have a look at them in their less jumpy form, you will be able to. So as Michael said, we were actually set up originally in 2012 by the BBC and the Arts Council of England, but we now work with arts and cultural funders and artists around the UK nations, in Canada, New Zealand, China, Japan, here in Ireland, which is brilliant, and supporting arts organisations and artists to make great art, reach new audiences using digital media, content and platforms. And that's been, absolutely accelerated in the last 12 months. We've had inquiries and people coming to us from all over the world, which is extraordinary. We support these artists and organisations through our skills development programme of mentoring, webinars, online toolkits, which you're all very welcome to go and look at, that are on the Spaces website, and one-to-one strategic consultancy, and through commissioning partnerships with UK broadcasters and with other arts funders, helping artists to produce work for broadcast and online publication. In fact, we're currently working on the second round of the Culture and Quarantine series in partnership with all 4 UK arts councils and the BBC at the moment, and that is a commissioning round directed specifically at artists who identify as disabled. And as a result of all of that, over the last 5 years, we have commissioned, somewhere between 275, it depends when you count it, to 300 digital projects. And we've worked with over 800 cultural organisations, helping them with their digital development. So I think what that means is that I think we have a pretty unique point of view in this area of publishing digital cultural content online. And so I guess you might think that means we have all the answers. And I'm really sorry to tell you that we don't. Not that I think anyone else does either, not within the cultural sector and not within other industries. As you all know from your own personal experience, the digital landscape is overcrowded, it's volatile, it's unpredictable, and it's transforming itself with increasing rapidity. And these last 12 months have seen that on supercharge. So why are we here? A Midlands-based English digital agency talking to a group of Irish theatre makers, venues, producers, funders. Well, because whilst we don't have all the answers, I think we do have some useful insights that are relevant to you. I think we have a pretty good idea of the challenges you're facing in connecting with your audiences online. And we've got some thoughts about the types of questions, as Michael referred to, questions you might want to ask yourselves in order to develop a successful long-term digital strategy. And the first insight that I want to mention is that digital isn't a thing. In fact, it's a word I would happily have banned because it just causes more confusion and insecurity. Everyone thinks it's a thing, just one that they don't fully understand. Well, it's not. It's just an umbrella word that's used to describe a multitude of different ideas, outputs, and outcomes in lots of different situations. So to start with, one of the things that I think we find is easier to break it down and think of it as 2 very distinct things when you're talking about it. And the first one is, it means online audience engagement. What does it mean to you as an artist or as an organisation if your audiences never come through the doors of your building to meet you in person? How does that challenge you to think about your work? What opportunities does that present you with? And what are you going to do to test that idea to see if it's really the right way forward for you, your creative practice and your audiences? And then secondly, the other side of it is it's about the use of new digital technologies, immersive, interactive, AI, etc., to inform, develop and innovate within the creative work you make and the experiences you offer to audiences. The danger in talking about digital as one term is that these 2 quite distinct concepts get muddled. There's often a sense around the audience engagement piece that it's the responsibility of the digital person in the marketing and comms team. I bet that sounds familiar to a few of you. And back to my earlier statement, what if your audiences never meet you in person? I know you would all now, thinking back over the last 12 months, as you've had to shift your focus to talking to your audiences entirely online, would you ever consider that that was entirely the responsibility of the marketing and comms teams? No, of course you don't. Your instinct is for all of you to be involved in that discussion. So we need to carry that thinking forward now to the post-pandemic landscape. Stop thinking in the more traditional departmental way and start thinking about the potential for radical transformation in the way we approach audiences and what we offer them. And it's really important that we share as a sector, well beyond our local and national boundaries, sharing evidence, learning, best practice, all of it. This is a new and emerging form of dialogue with audiences around the globe. And we need to make sure that the voice of our artists and their work are seen and heard within it. And to do that, we need to be talking to one another about our challenges, about our failures, about the unforeseen obstacles, as much as about the success and the glory. So the context. I also want to touch briefly on the changes that have been going on within the wider landscape for presenting cultural work online and in the media, which really serve to underline the dramatic rate and scale of change we've all witnessed. What we're seeing is that the old curated cultural models are breaking down. Lynn will absolutely attest to that. And whilst I think the marginalisation of arts and cultural content on our TV screens and in our newspapers is terrible and speaks to a fundamental lack of understanding of the significance of the work, there are some good things that have come from this. There was a time when any arts organisation or artist waited for RTE or the Irish Times arts correspondent to ring up and say, hey, I've heard about the new show, I'm going to run a feature, I'm going to cover the show on TV on the news, arts and cultural content, or indeed even cover the show itself. Well, now we live in a fully democratised universe of publishing opportunities where everyone can publish their work online. So this is about a significant shift in our thinking as a sector about these new opportunities, recognising that these come with new responsibilities as publishers, not just as producers. As I know some of you have identified in the questions you sent in ahead of time, you know the rights situations are completely different online. The codes of practice are different. The need to identify content as not suitable for, the context and the background to the work when it's being shown in this far more open source environment are challenging, sometimes quite brutal in the speed and ferocity of reaction, and very hard to predict. But we're all publishers now, your kids, your choir, your local GP surgery. So we all know it's unregulated, it's noisy, and it's unpredictable as a landscape. But it does have the potential for you to reach many, many more people with your work. And when we say that it means you can reach many more people, I'm not just talking about people millions, thousands of miles away from you. I'm talking about hyper-local audiences, the ones who currently exist 5 feet from your front door but never come through it because they don't feel that they have an invitation or the knowledge or indeed the desire to come in. And then there are the audiences on the other side of the globe who are unlikely to ever meet you in person but are drawn to your work. By publishing online, you can and do have an opportunity to reframe and reach to all of them. Added to that, during this global pandemic, we've just run the biggest online audience experiment ever, forcing our existing audiences and new ones to consume culture exclusively online for what is now a year. What we at the Space have seen has reinforced us in our belief that for this to work for you, you have to identify your target audiences first and foremost in your mind before you commission any digital work. And beyond that, what we've also seen is the importance of realizing this isn't about a passive relationship. This new form of dialogue is about interaction. How your audiences get to let you know about themselves, what they want, how they feel about what you do, and for you to work out what's in it for them to stay engaged. Can they participate? Is the content available and easy to find again if they put it down, walk away and want to come back? What community do they feel they've been invited to join in with? Who are you so that they remember that for the next time? How can you make sure that you are more memorable than the piece of digital content? No artist or organisation should risk being defined or indeed even typecast online by one piece of digital content. So how do you make sure you get your identity as an artist or an organisation over? So, as I say, it's all about audiences first. Who do you want to talk to? What do you want to say? Why are they going to listen? I think those are the three key questions that you need to ask yourselves first. And within that, if you can answer those questions, it will begin to guide you to the style of the work, the format of the work, i.e. short form, long form, interactive, immersive, and the publishing platforms you want to target. And then to consider how audiences participate. How do you make it feel relevant to them? And when I say relevant, I would also put innovation alongside relevance. We need to be actively engaged in considering how online audience behaviours are changing and how we can recognise and reference those in the work we make to feel relevant to our specific target audiences. We're going to try another little video clip in a second. It's from a short clip of a recent Space Commission from site-specific theatre company Dante or Die. They had created a new live work, User Not Found, which had been very successful but was impacted by the first lockdown. So they came to the space to apply for funding to transform this intimate immersive theatre production into a mobile audio experience. Ask the central question, what happens to your digital identity when you die? And is in fact a profound exploration of grief. We talked to them about how to make this feel like they were adding to the live experience without overcomplicating the production and distribution ask of the project. What this ended up being was a mobile iteration that provided, so it's an audio first piece, but as you play that on your smart device, on your phone, you're then given a visual catalogue of the social media content that's being referred to in the audio experience. It really takes you right inside the lead character's mind, and it works incredibly effectively. It was released in partnership with The Guardian, got some great reviews, and for a small site-specific theatre company, they got 25,000 views on Facebook and 10,500 views on YouTube. So if we can just play that clip, Sam, thank you. Thank you. We can put a longer clip up for you into the chat. We didn't want to overstretch on the video. So a targeted, participatory, relevant and innovative approach will win you a very loyal core audience. And in return, they become your global digital ambassadors. And that takes me to my next keyword, which is advocacy. Do not forget to leverage your networks, your fans, your supporters, the people who already value your work, the themes and beliefs you hold. Every single one of them sits at the heart of other networks of interlinked people. And these are communities of shared interest and shared worldview. And because of that, and there's a lot of distrust sitting online at the moment, we know. So it's those smaller leverage networks that actually have a much greater degree of trust within them, i.e. if somebody within one of your Facebook groups sends you a piece of video content, you're much more likely to look at that. And then if that recommendation turns out to be a good one and you enjoy it, you will pass it on into your network. So there is an extraordinary way of making those networks work for you. And one of the examples that I always talk about is we worked with an organisation in the Midlands called Creative Black Country. They had a project, 100 Masters, which was celebrating contemporary craftsmen and women working in the West Midlands. We worked with them to launch a new Facebook page for the project and to make 6 short films optimised for Facebook. they were working with one of our associate producers, and they sort of quickly realized how inspiring and quite how global these craft stories were, and that it provided a, an extraordinary opportunity to build a huge digital following. That project went on, the Facebook page launched. They grew their Facebook followers from 22 to 80,000. And the views on the project within the space of a week and a half for the first film exceeded 10 million views. Now, what was really interesting, so we did a piece of work on what had happened with that, was it was this extraordinary network of really small embedded craft communities. And what was fantastic about it was those craft communities, even in the first day or 2 days that the films were online, those craft communities would only have sort of say 100 people within them, but they were completely spread around the world. So it was the first film was a woman who makes beautiful mosaics from recycled pottery, and her networks and the networks around her were in India, they were in Africa, they were in North America. So those first 100s were all spread around the globe. And I've described it a bit like watching ink disperse through water, because we were watching the numbers go online, kind of going, what is going on here? And it was really, really interesting. So it wasn't about some extraordinary influencer, some high profile celebrity on Twitter talking about it. It was really hand cranked small networks that are engaged and trust one another. And I think that was 3 years ago. And that sense of needing to work within networks of trust and engagement has only grown since then. And a second short example I would talk about would be Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond's production of Maya Arad Yassur's Amsterdam. So this is a piece about collective identity, foreignness, alienation, and charts some of the experience and history of anti-Semitism in Amsterdam in the past and in the present. And they'd applied to the space to capture and stream the live performance online. So we worked with them very early on a distribution strategy, focusing on a seeding list that targeted online communities and forums who'd be interested in the themes of the work and getting them to promote the live stream. And they only published for a limited time run, I think it was just over a week, on Facebook and Twitter, and they got 57,000 views on Facebook and 6,000 on Twitter. But more than that, and more importantly than that, I think for me, they got so much really positive, incredibly emotional feedback from audiences, thanking them for making the work available and for highlighting the themes expressed in it. So again, really interesting. And before I end, I'm just going to touch on two other key words that I think it is worth everyone considering when thinking about the broader reasons for adopting a digital strategy. And the first one is sustainability. We are all, as we all know, living in a time of increasingly dire climate fragility. And I think it behooves all of us to consider how and where the deployment of digital communication might help reduce our carbon impact. So, for example, digital touring. Does it really, in this modern day and age, make sense for small theatre companies to be travelling all the way to the Edinburgh Festival, let's say, to sit in a venue with 2 people in the audience every night? Over these last 18 months, we have had a complete absence of any emerging talent being visible to any of us. So that, 18 months is going to be 2 years by the time we're really even seeing anything close to normal. 2 years is a long time for young writers, young directors, young actors, young designers to have no visibility, not just to the wider audiences, but within our own community and sector to be able to see the work they're developing and producing. How can we use digital to now learn from this situation going forward to create forums and showcases online that can actually help to take that emerging talent and actually present it on an even kind of larger global scale? And, generally speaking, how can we all work together to use digital tools and digital online audience engagement to lighten our footprint in the real world? And the final thing that I wanted to just talk about is really accessibility. We can all see the value and the opportunities provided by digital in making our work more accessible to more people. And we can do that, and we need to consider, and we actively are considering, but there's more that we can do to make sure that it really is genuinely accessible, considering the needs and the preferences of all our potential communities. And there's great work being done around that area. But I would also point to, what about the community of artists who identify as disabled? These last 12 months have been especially devastating and alienating for them. So how can we make sure that digital is there and can help enable and amplify their practice as well? The Culture in Quarantine series that I mentioned is working with another organisation in the UK, Unlimited, who work with disabled artists around the UK. And it's been a really interesting conversation with them about how we make even the application process, the online application process, as accessible as possible. So it shouldn't always be about form filling if people want to just put an audio application or a video application in, but really to consider all of those elements. And so I just want to mention, to finish with now, a project that actually came out of the first Culture in Quarantine series called Sign Night, made by Kathy Marga, a Bristol-based deaf artist, to help illustrate the deaf community's experience of lockdown. It is a beautiful short film that captures a poetic conversation in sign language projected onto buildings in central Bristol, inspired by the balcony performances of Wuhan and Lombardy, but this time using British Sign Language. It's a beautiful film. I urge you to watch the whole thing, and we'll put a link in the chat. But I bring it up here because I know that Kathy was on the brink of quitting as an artist. Even before the pandemic, she was struggling financially with family, with a husband who also has disabilities. And she just felt the pressure was becoming too much, and she couldn't make the work she wanted to make, and she wasn't being heard and seen by audiences. Supported by Unlimited, who knew her, she made an application to Culture in Quarantine, and she did make the film. And to date, that's received 43,000 views on Facebook, and a ton of acknowledgements across Twitter and other social media platforms. And I know that Kathy won't mind me saying that it has completely transformed her sense of confidence in the work she wants to make, the importance of it. And she is now firmly back at work, which is absolutely brilliant. So I would just say, yeah, accessibility would be my other big word to put in here. So we have a very short clip, I think, of that, Sam, if you could just play it before I summarize. Thank you. And so just to sum up, what I would say is you're all publishers now. We're all publishers now. Your potential audience is everyone from the hyperlocal to the global. You need to put audiences first before you commission any digital content. Your priorities questions should include: what do you want to say? Who do you want to listen to you? Why is it relevant to them? And how can they participate? Then absolutely consider how to maximize your reach out through your networks and their ongoing advocacy for you as organizations and individuals. And take time in that bigger picture review to consider the other positive potential outcomes of a greater use of digital around accessibility and sustainability. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Fiona. And we'll no doubt come back to a lot of the things you touched on repeatedly and in different forms over the next couple of days. So we're now joined by Lynn Gardner, theatre critic, writer, and I think well-known contributor to The Stage and The Guardian, Fergus, Sheil, artistic director of Irish National Opera, Neil Murray, Joint Artistic Director of the Abbey Theatre, and Vicky Featherstone, Artistic Director at the Royal Court. And I'm going to start with Lynn, because Lynn, you've been writing on this subject for some time now, including several very important provocations during 2020, such as your article, Digital Presents a Challenge to Theatre. So can I ask you, why do you consider that this practice is not only here to stay, but likely to become even deeply more embedded and influential across the whole sector?
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everybody. Listen, I am absolutely not an expert on this. I'm just somebody who's been lucky enough to be sort of paid to think out loud about it. I'd kind of pick up in some ways in answer to that, to one of the things that that Fiona raised about the fact that, you know, we are in the middle of a cultural shift, which is the greatest cultural shift since the invention of the printing press. And I think the thing that we need to kind of remember about what happened because of the printing press is, of course, that it was really, really bad for monks who were doing illuminated manuscripts, but it was absolutely fantastic for reading. And I think the question really facing theatre is, do we want to be the monks, or do we want to be part of that explosion in reading? And I think that one of the things that has happened during the pandemic is quite simply that theatre has started thinking about digital and other means of distribution in a way that probably more over the last 10 months than it's really thought about it over the previous 10 years. And I think there are lots of very understandable reasons for that. But I also think that one of the things that has shifted and changed is that I think in theatre, we've been very hung up on the idea of live and the idea of being gathered in one space together. But actually, this is live. We are gathered in one space together. So I think those ideas around what constitutes live and how we might use that as theatre makers is up for grabs, and therefore is kind of really interesting. So I would say that there are several main areas, some of which actually, of course, Fiona has touched upon. I think there are issues around distribution. There are issues around creativity. Why, if you're a theatre maker, wouldn't you want to use every tool that is available to you in the toolbox? There are questions around collaboration and about the fact that digital allows us to collaborate across borders, across the globe, particularly in the UK at the moment because of Brexit. That feels particularly, I think, important to us. There are questions around income diversification and how that may work, or currently at the moment perhaps is not working necessarily for many, but how that can be made to work. And then I think there is the issue that Fiona raised absolutely about climate change, because quite simply, you know, we contribute to CO2 and the footprint as an industry. And unless we do something about climate change, then actually we're not going to be able to make theatre in 10 or 20 years' time. And then I think there is another issue that we should touch upon, which I think is simply to do with the pandemic. And about the fact that, gosh, I don't want to depress everyone on a Thursday morning, but the idea that we are ever going to be going back to normal is, at least in the foreseeable future, I think is unlikely to be the case. So it seems to me extremely likely, not that I'm a virologist, but that we will be in situations of potential, that the pandemic will become endemic. That may leave us, even with vaccines, in situations where we have maybe occasional lockdowns or lockdowns in areas that we will have social distancing potentially happening for some time to come, and being able to pivot or to create work which is hybrid in some way, I think is really, really useful. So I think the issue around distribution, I think, is a really interesting one. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I am so touched all of the time by sometimes when I sit in a theatre and I look and I go, goodness, all of us at 7:30 on a wet Wednesday afternoon have come to this place and space and are sitting together. And there is something that, as I say, I find infinitely moving about that. I think it will absolutely continue to go on. But I think that one of the things that our experience during the pandemic has done is maybe to break that dominance of buildings and to ask questions about whether or not we may be able to gather together and interact and act as a community in different ways. And I think very clearly, you know, as Fiona has said, you know, those are often issues around geography, around transportation, and around access. And at the moment, having to be in that, or not at the moment, but having to be in that at the same time in the same place defines who can and cannot see the work. Also, actually, in theatre, has also often defined who can or who cannot make the work. So I think those kind of shifts are really, really helpful. I think that we need to think really beyond digital as well. One of the things that I found absolutely delightful during the pandemic is that I've seen shows that are streamings or are captured of particular pieces of work, but I've also had shows delivered to me, or pieces of theatre delivered to me via email, like Invisible Summer via the Royal Court. I've had shows delivered down the telephone. I've had them by postcard, by letter. And I think the interesting thing for artists is that this is about different kinds of creativity and about that thing of using all those tools in the toolbox. At the moment, I'm in the middle of something that goes on over a 2-week period and involves various kind of audio downloads, but also involves telephone calls. So I think thinking in those ways creates all sorts of opportunities for artists and may actually bring different artists or artists who have previously kind of thought, oh no, theatre, you know, that's not for me, into the mix. So I think those things are potentially very interesting. And I think one of the things that perhaps that we need to think about doing is to get away from the idea. I think one of the reasons that lots of theatre companies and makers and other were kind of put off by digital is because the dominant model was the NT Live model, which was incredibly expensive, and everyone went, how can we possibly compete with that? But actually, we've seen absolutely incredible experiments, and a lot of them are experiments, and in their very early stages, we've seen things like the live streams that have been developed and being done using a different technology, via Bristol Old Vic and Wise Children. We have seen the shows on Zoom done by companies like Big Telly and Creation. Listen, none of this stuff is perfect, but it's actually really, really interesting. So I think that to a large degree, what it kind of comes down to is I think we need to think more broadly, I think, about what it is that theatre is. People are always saying to me sometimes when I've written about work, or editors in newspapers, I can tell you, used to do this all the time, which is that they would go, but Lynn, is that really theatre? And I think that's just absolutely the wrong question to ask. I think what we need to be asking ourselves more than ever at this moment in time is not is that theatre, but what is it that theatre could be? I'm going to shut up now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I mean, it brings up this issue of a tendency you mentioned between monks and scribes, between it's either or, it's one or the other. One wins out of the other, one must die for the other to live. And I think we all understand, or should perhaps work at that idea, to recognize that theatre, whatever that means, as you said, has been such a diverse and increasingly diverse series of practices and approaches that to suddenly return to a kind of purist mind isn't going to help us long term. Everything is now on the table, and all what they offer for artists, what this offers for artists, I think more than anything, is additional highways and pathways to travel if they want to. And I think that's a really important point to really ram home for ourselves, is that this issue of being, the sense of feeling we're being forced to do something, when in fact it's really important to turn this around into a choice. And Fergus, you and Irish National Opera, when the company was set up, do you want to come off mute there, Fergus, if you wouldn't mind?
Hello, hi.
When you set up the company, for many reasons as a national company, but you were already thinking in a very progressive manner about there are many forms and many alternative routes that you wanted to travel before the pandemic started. Do you want to just talk about that strategic viewpoint for a moment, about why you feel and you felt innovation and digital innovation was always going to be part of the mix for you?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be part of this, and thanks to Theatre Forum. Can I just say one thing before I answer the question in relation to the scribes and the monks becoming obsolete? I don't know anybody who thinks theatre or opera, as it was before the pandemic, will be obsolete afterwards. I think we're all longing for that moment when we can get back into a theatre. So yes, it's really exciting to look at all the other possibilities, but we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater either, I hope. Anyway, that's yeah, I think when we started the company in January 2018, so 3 years ago, and I was very clear from the beginning that our vision wanted to be national. We wanted to, and we debated whether we wanted the word national in our title as well. But I thought it was important that Ireland hadn't ever had a company, an opera company, that thought nationally in the way that we wanted to think nationally. So that's not just about performing all over the country, which we've done in 26 venues in 3 years so far, which is great. But it's not just about that, but it's about taking a national remit, about developing the art form, developing talent, giving artists opportunities to work and things like that. But when we compare ourselves to other national opera companies around Europe, most of those are building-based organizations in massive structures in the center of beautiful European cities with, massive auditoriums and the workforces of 1,000 or more. And so this idea of a national opera company is this behemoth, really, which we're not. And we're modeled very much. One of the things I loved was the National Theatre of Scotland, which I know Vicky, who's going to speak in a moment, was part of for a long time. But that idea of a theatre without its own building that could exist in a fleet of footway, and this is what we're trying to achieve with opera, that we can, without a building, we can do lots of things in lots of different places. And so digital was very much part of that from the outset. Now, what the pandemic has done, I think, is fast forward the digital thing and ask us new questions about what is the mix that we want to have long term. And some of the things we've done on digital in the last few months have been really rewarding and have given us a lot of profile and done things in a way that we wouldn't have done without the pandemic. But even before the pandemic, the way we viewed ourselves was really to try and get our work out to as wide an audience as we could. That business of accessibility, that business of the fact that lots of people in Ireland have no relationship with opera. They don't naturally necessarily go to opera. And so how could we tempt people with something that we think is the most is one of the most fabulous things you can do to attend an opera. So actually really old technology like radio, which I think is often overlooked. We did a deal with Lyric FM. We got all our operas onto Lyric FM, and some of those went to the EBU. So they were listened to by literally millions of people around Europe. And that's a huge digital footprint, if you like, in such an old medium. So that was one important thing. And then we tried to capture as many of our performances by video, and we would put those out. And we worked on different platforms, including our own website, but also Opera Vision, which is a big pan-European platform for opera. Some of you will know it. And as well with RTE, we experimented with putting Madame Butterfly on the RTE player. We haven't had any operas actually broadcast on television yet, which would be great if we could. But we also did things like street art operas, where we projected animated versions of operas onto walls on the streets with Brian Irvine and John McElduff. And they went absolutely all around the world to different places. And we were also developing a VR virtual reality community opera, which was part of a big European consortium of companies. So that was underway. Michael and the Civic are partner in that, as are communities in Inishmaan and in the Midlands in Offaly Westmeath, where these are places, some of them are places that don't traditionally have a big operatic tradition. So we're trying to develop an interest in the art form through VR operas. So we were looking at all these, and we appointed a digital communications manager to our team at the very outset, and we were clear that digital was going to be a big area for us. But of course now it's got even bigger with the pandemic, and during the pandemic we've done lots of different projects. We've done some live streaming of concerts. We haven't live streamed a full operatic production yet, and they've gone well. And we did our big opera project in the autumn, 20 Shots of Opera, was 20 new commissions of short operas made specifically for film. And that was really interesting because these were obviously, making short operas for film wasn't something we would do normally, but it got us a huge international audience, and we got reviews in lots of, Wall Street Journal, Gardner, all these places that wouldn't normally cover our work. And we discovered audiences who wouldn't normally come to our shows because they don't live in Ireland. And that was really interesting because it allowed us compete in a way with our fellow national opera companies who are all much bigger than us, but it allowed us compete on a sort of an even keel with them. In fact, the flexibility we have as a company allowed us to, I think, pivot quite quickly in a way that larger companies with major infrastructure and overheads weren't able to pivot so quickly. So I think there's, some of the things I'm taking from all this is that there is a huge audience out there who are interested in our work, who don't normally, there's the audience in Ireland, but there's the international audience as well. People who may not come to our opera productions at all are engaging with our work. And I suppose the thoughts that I have is when, we hope at some stage, despite the challenges ahead, we hope at some stage this pandemic is going to be behind us, or largely behind us, or a lot of the elements of it be behind us. And when we do get back to performing in theatres, how do we balance that live work in theatres with our increased digital presence and growing that digital presence still further in the future? And I suppose one of the things I'm thinking about, and we're developing a project now which will have several legs to it, if you like. So we'll start with making a film. As part of making a film, we also make a CD recording because we have to record the audio first. So we'll have an option of a film and a CD. And then we're developing an app which will be in virtual augmented reality. Some of the opera presented in augmented reality, so people can watch it in different locations. And then when we film the opera, it'll be in a site-specific location. And then lastly, we will hopefully in 6 months' time do an actual theatrical performance of the opera. And that will be informed by some of the filming we've done, by the app development, by the augmented reality. So we're looking at ways in which you know, our commitment to one opera and one production can live in a number of different ways over an extended period of maybe up to a year or so. And that's something we're trying out. It's quite new. And we're looking at, you know, how we can do that, and what, you know, what the different thinking is that can also allow us the flexibility if something happens with the pandemic, that we can decide to spend more resources on one area and downplay another area, or balance how we commit our resources. We change that balance over the course of the year ahead. So they're just some of the thoughts that are coming into my mind. The idea of revenue, how much money we can make from digital, is interesting. Anytime we put on an opera, it loses money. That's why we have our Arts Council funding, which is wonderful and which we're very grateful for. And depending on the opera we do, and depending on the venue and the size of the audience, you lose more or less money. And in digital, we are also we need Arts Council funding in order to be able to do our digital work. But is there a future where we could grow the income from the digital area so much that it might even support itself? That feels at the moment a long way off, but are we on a path to that? There will be some interesting questions which I'd like to think about over the years ahead. And we're also, as a company, we're also reevaluating our own digital strategy so that we're ready for the future. One of the things I find difficult to say is when the previous speakers were talking about knowing your audience and who you're making it for. It's really difficult to know that. I mean, it's easier if you put a production into a theatre. You hope you'll get a certain amount of audience. You meet the audience in person. You see them going out the door, whether they're smiling or dodging you, and you know if the piece has been a success or a failure, and you don't know that online, so you don't get that feedback so instantly, and it's really hard to know. So I'd be curious to know, how do we get to know who our online audience is or could be, because it's so vast. So there's some initial thoughts from me, Michael. I'll hand back to you. Thanks. You're on mute now, Michael. You have to take yourself off mute.
Goodness me. There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Fergus. Yeah, this issue of communion, which it's a bit like the fish. The one thing the fish knows nothing about is water. We all knew about it, but we didn't have to think about it because we lived it and experienced it. And now it's not there for us at the moment. I think that's more than anything. What everybody constantly rightfully brings up is that now almost, dare I say it, and I don't mean this in any funny way, nostalgic feeling of being with people together that made the work so meaningful. And I think that's an extraordinary outcome of this terrible situation, is that it's only heightened the importance to everybody in the industry of what that missing ingredient is. And I think the question is still there about how we create that same or a similar form of communion and engagement online when that feeling doesn't appear to be there. But I think it would be good to turn to Neil and Vicky, because they've worked collaboratively between the Abbey and the Royal Court for a long period on Cypress Avenue, which had a live festival, live, garnered enormous critical and audience acclaim around the world, and then have reconceived the piece as primarily an online engagement. So Vicky, what as a director, what was the inspiration, the spur for doing that? A piece of work that already had a life and then renewing it in a new way.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. So many things to think about, so much in the chat as well. My head's like going like, yeah, well, I think one of the kind of initial thoughts about it was we were rehearsing it, and Stephen Ray, who played the main part in Cypress Avenue, said the politics of this are so important, as you would expect Stephen Ray to say. The politics of this are so important. I really hope that we can get this message and this conversation out as far as we possibly can. And that was very early on in the first time that we were doing it. And while we did it 3 different times, and while we were doing it the second time, we both together came up with the notion, there's this long walk that he takes. And we said, if we ever made a film of this, we would do the long walk to the park in Belfast. Wouldn't that be amazing that he'd go thing? So it sort of lodged in my head. And of course, this was all pre-pandemic. So the work the Royal Court's been doing subsequently is much more kind of tonally in line with what we're talking about in terms of digital, but this was pre-pandemic. And I was in a conversation about another project with Emma Cahusac and John T. Claypole at the BBC. And I sort of said, we're really interested if there's any form of kind of relationship with you about putting this into a kind of broadcast capacity. And I have an idea that I'm really interested in what Lynn was talking about this, what the hybrid is between theatre and film. And, if we did it, is there a way that we could film it in the theatre and acknowledge the bearing witness, the collective bearing witness? What we're talking about is not about not having theatre and having digital instead, the collective bearing witness, but then people also being able to see something filmed, which is on location. So we kind of built it up, started a conversation with Fiona and Angela at the space, who were extraordinary in terms of guiding us through what it could be. And we sort of developed it from there. The thing that was really exciting about it was the kind of partnership of how that works with the space, that expertise, but then the other partners, of course, the Abbey and Barbara Broccoli came on board. We had to raise some money ourselves, but the kind of collaboration around that. And it first aired on the BBC4 and was on iPlayer for a while, but we'd always thought that we would bring it back for International Theatre Day, which is the end of March. Of course, we were all in lockdown by then. So we brought it back for a month from the 27th of March to the 27th of April. And with the Abbey, with our relationship with the Abbey, the reach of that was absolutely incredible. It had 210,000 full views. I've had so much response from it. It was seen in over 26 countries. 80,000 people came to our website for the first time ever. So the kind of reach of that was an incredible thing. I'll hand over to Neil.
Morning everybody, and thanks to the forum for having us all here. It's great to be talking with Vicky, as always. The great thing about Cypress Avenue as well was that I suppose it was there and done and ready to go. It had been already conceived in its previous life, and what was great about the way that filming happened was that Stephen's big thing was not only about their journey, but also that it played in Belfast, and it was an amazing experience to take Cypress Avenue to Belfast, I think back in 2018. And all of that came out of that. So when the pandemic hit, it was amazing to have this show that was not only, it had been made in another time, but it fitted that moment so beautifully. And what I wanted to just have a brief conversation, Vicky, with you is about some of the things that have come out of this and the different responses of theatres to how we respond in a digital world. And, the Abbey, for example, I think it's fair to say, like you, I was reading an interview with you in the Independent, and like you, Graham and I were like, we have to get money to artists. That's the first thing we have to think about, is to get money to artists. And that's been a really big aim for the Abbey. And we've made quite a lot of specific digital new work online, and we put a lot of focused energy into that, starting with the Deer Island trilogy, I suppose, which we got the first part went out in April 28th. And I think it's fair to say that you were more measured in your comments around digital theatre, about where you felt it sat, and the court's output's been really fantastic and really interesting and different, as we would expect from you, in terms of the Caretaker project, which was just that really moving thing of, the camera in an empty space, and you've also put a lot of energy into the living newspaper idea, which is more about working with artists, 200 artists, but not necessarily in a digital way. So I wonder about, and where's your current thinking around, a bit like Julie said at the top of this, or when this started a year ago, I wasn't really, digital theatre was not really something I really wanted to engage with, and now maybe I do. And also, as Michael said earlier, only if we want to. And I suppose my question to you is, how much do you want to, and how hard is it for you to make that distinction between live work and digital work?
God, big question, Neil. I think it's interesting as well, picking up from what Fergus said, when we started National Theatre of Scotland in 2005, we didn't have a building. So our website was genuinely was our only connection. Yeah. And for our 5th birthday, we did an entirely online project. 5-minute theatre, which was 24 hours of online theatre. And that's because we chose to do it, not because we had to do it. And I think any moment in time that we're able to ask the question, what is theatre and what can it be, that Lynn is provoking, is always extraordinary for us. And theatre started with the ancient Egyptians. The form of theatre is safe, guys. We're not, nothing will replace it. It's existed throughout flood, famine, wars, everything. This is an incredible opportunity, the digital moment. And the fact that we've been fast-tracked into it in terms of an evolution, I think is thrilling. And that writers that we work with at the Royal Court find it thrilling. We're not saying it's instead of, nothing needs to be instead of. We have the capacity to increase the way that we kind of engage. And the big thing, Neil's very generous about what the Royal Court's done, is that it's all been artist-led, is the really important thing. It's not a top-down thing through a marketing department, all due respect to the amazing marketing departments, about how do we keep speaking to our core audience, or what do we keep rolling out. It's artists going, this is what I want to use the platform for, this is what I want to do. So the work has been incredibly varied. The project I'm most proud of that we did is My White Best Friend, which is a project which was in response to Black Lives Matter and the tragic murder of George Floyd last summer. And it was a project that already existed, that Rachel Delahaye, one of our writers, and Millie Battier, our trainee director, had already made. But they made a live version of it. So it was a different version every night for a week. It started off with 150 people at the beginning of the week, and by the end of the week there were 900 people in the audience. We had a kind of sliding scale of ticket prices for that, and because it was specifically in response to Black Lives Matter and the kind of institutional racism of our country, there was also a Black only space at the end of it that was mediated, and so we had people coming to that event that would never have felt that the Royal Court, even though I would love it to be different, was a significantly safe enough space for those conversations to take place. That is extraordinary. So we're thinking a lot about what our digital work is about inclusivity, is about sustainability, is about new audiences, is about new audience throughout the world, and letting artists tell us what that work needs to look like. And we're really excited about that.
Is there something as well about the pace at which we can work digitally? I've been struck by the work that we've been doing, and we're currently working on a response to the Mother and Baby Home report in Ireland, which is truly shocking. And we're hoping to have that on the Abbey stage within the next, my comms team are on here and they'll kill me if I give the actual date away, but within probably the next 4 to 6 weeks. And that's with working with probably, again, the bones of 100 artists. And the idea of being able to get something from an idea, from a notion in mid-January to on stage in mid-March, I mean, that to me has been that's been liberating, actually. And it's happened on a few of the projects we've done. And we've done more traditional things as well. And we have managed to do live work, which has been fantastic, working with Willie at DTF on The Great Hunger up at IMA, and what was different about that was we were playing to 4 audiences of 15 people a night, and it felt like filling the Aviva Stadium, having 60 people to see live work now. That concept of how we see a live audience and how you feel about playing to small houses, but that sense of immediacy, that digital sense of immediacy. And I think like you, I think what we try to do at the Abbey is focus on new work. We haven't taken work out of the locker. We don't have a massive archive like NT of brilliantly shot films. So it's kind of like we can either show back of the theatre with the camera stuff, or we can make something new. And I think that sense of making new work has been the exciting part, and the pace at which we can bring it to the stage, which is something we always talked about at National Theatre of Scotland, is how quickly can we get it on before the moment's gone. And I just wonder, I suppose, finally, Michael, sorry, I'll shut up. Finally, whether that's something that's been a good provocation from a digital world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's an interesting balance, isn't there, in making art and responding about kind of the slow cooking and the right that we have to be able to kind of percolate and think of things over many, many years to have real kind of depth in that thinking. And then the kind of counter of that, which is how are we responding and how are individuals responding? So this is a brilliant way to be able to do that. A lot of the questions have been about what's the difference between this and television. And having worked in television, and my sister works in television, one of the big differences is that we have the ability to turn these things around ourselves. We're not going through major commissioning groups. We don't have to do audience focus groups. I do think the budgets are relative. I get very cross when people say that theatre is cheaper, but it's at a greater risk to us. So it's relatively not cheaper. But I think the difference is, yes, that we can turn things around and that the work can be autonomous and genuinely artist-led. And television, even though it's shifting, is nowhere close to that yet, and is still incredibly formulaic and doesn't actually change form in any way. And everything that we're talking about is about kind of formal invention. And I think that is incredibly exciting. And the other thing, just in response to that, Neil, that I would also just like to throw in, there's an interesting thing when we work with the BBC, of course, with the space, that you get the expertise from BBC, long ago, major BBC training schemes to train people to be camera people, to be all of those things. Now, the BBC doesn't do that anymore. So there's an interesting thing about when the people come in to do that work, they are of a certain age, they're of a certain colour, the same colour as me, and they all wear black t-shirts. And it's a very specific thing. They're a benefit of that scheme. But that's specific. What we're looking at the moment, and it's something that the Young Vic have done very successfully, and we're talking about with the other London theatres, is how do you train up your current staff when they're not able to be making theatre in the way that we look at it, to be able to be the people that can put that work online in a deft way. And that's really exciting. And you hire in the equipment because you can never afford that, but can we use what we have to be able to create that? And that's something we're really thinking about.
No, absolutely. That's true. That's been one of the, I think, for our team, and we've been lucky at the Abbey because, again, like Fergus earlier, we're lucky because our Arts Council funding has allowed us to keep going and keep making work and getting artists working as well. But what has been great has been that sense of our own organisation having to change and having to become more flexible, and people learning new skills and working with. Whenever we've tried, actually, even over the pandemic, to engage with the TV companies, it's kind of come to nothing because their timelines are too slow as well. We move much faster. But what's out there now is there are amazing young digital companies who are coming in to work with us, who are teaching us new skills as well. So I think that's been a real learning. Michael, I better hand back to you before me and Vicky just go and have a pint or something and hang out for hours.
Thank you both very much. Anna, do you want to jump in here in terms of any major questions from the chat?
I think just in response to some of the earlier comments, there were a few questions and comments about measurement and views and whatever. There will be much more detail around audience, particularly measurement, in session 2 after this one. So we won't come back to you on that directly in this. There's another sort of discussion or a thread through the conversation in the chat, which is about seeing the live and the digital or online in opposition to each other from some people, and from others seeing the hybrid or the continuum as being the way of the future. So I'm just wondering, Michael, if you would like to, some people have commented particularly as well about the resources that might be needed to maintain both the live and the hybrid, and whether that will disadvantage, firstly, artists, and secondly, smaller companies or the less well-funded companies. So there's lots of other stuff, but those seem to be themes that are coming through very strongly. But it's this, the idea of the live and the digital being in opposition rather than in harmony, and a continuum on which people negotiate their own terms rather than being forced to do so because of, you know, COVID reasons or other reasons. Is that, does that?
Yeah, I mean, when we throw it open, I mean, Fergus, Fiona, Vicky, and Lynn, if you want, I mean, this issue of, one of the things I think that's so challenging at the moment is that we're almost all being forced to think about method rather than meaning. And it's that method, you know, we're using terms like live versus digital, hybrid, all these things, and a lot of them are connected to perhaps methodologies or how you do it. But the issue of what that experience we're still trying to keep alive in very different forms or to create new experiences. How do you all view that sense of the tension that seems to keep coming up about oppositional perspectives between those outcomes? Just jump in, Fiona.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it was really interesting. So lots of questions in the chat there, but Vicky probably talked to this, but you know, I've often said, and this is because I came from a background out of broadcast, working at the BBC, creating lots of kind of arts and cultural kind of events on television. And the way that I have always felt about it is that when you capture something and put it onto a broadcast screen, you know, that is the director's cut. You know, when Vicky was talking with Stephen about how Cypress Avenue was going to be filmed, and with the TV director that was working, you know, with Vicky to help her translate that, you know, you are choosing what the audience is going to see. You're cutting every shot, you're framing it, you're deciding. So in a way, you are giving them your point of view of what you think the subtext and the context for the work is. That is extraordinary. It's a fascinating insight if it's done well. I think in Cypress Avenue, I'm biased, I think it was done really well, but it's a view of it. If you sit in a theatre to watch it, it is your choice as an audience member as to who you look at, what you look at. I know obviously Vicky will say that she has very intentionally designed, had it lit, had costumes so that she is directing your attention, but nevertheless you have that freedom to choose what you're looking at. So those two things are great. They're two very different things. I don't think they ever need to be seen in competition with one another.
I agree. I think, and I think as well, I think that there are different. I think the idea of seeing a play in a theatre is different to making something specifically for a digital world, and I think they're different art forms almost. And I would always rather. I'm with Fergus. I want to go back into sitting in a full house in the Abbey and in the Royal Court and in other theatres. And just living in the moment of the play and going and having the drink afterwards and the conversations afterwards. But there are other ways also in which we communicate, and the international perspective I think has been enormous for the Abbey. You know, 46% of our audience this year has not been in Ireland, and that's over 350,000 people of a total audience. 46% are not. So it's opening up Irish stories, Irish performances, Irish actors, Irish work, Irish writers to an international audience, but it's not through just showing them plays. And I think, just very briefly, I think if we are going to be stuck in this world, as Lynn slightly doomily predicted, for a bit longer, and we still do want to see plays, and I want to fly a flag for Landmark, who did 2 brilliant streams over the last 2 weeks, both of The Approach from Project and Happy Days from the Olympia. If that is the way we are going to see plays through live streaming, we have to work together collaboratively. And I see a quick comment from Val Balance from the Arts Council earlier as well. And I think that's about us working together to invest in infrastructure so that we're not all spending a fortune on cameras and equipment that we don't really know how to use. Let's get a core of people who do know how to use it, who become a kind of National Theatre of Ireland touring around film crews, because I think there's a way to share resource to get the most out of that. So that's just a plea for some common sense around funding of that equipment.
Can I throw out a quick thing? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think that I mean, I agree with what everybody has said about the fact that, yeah, I'm absolutely longing to be back in a theatre. And that experience is different from what you get online. But I also think this conversation is very hung up on the idea of capture. Actually, I think that the most interesting things in
You've frozen for a moment.
Look at other possibilities and opportunities of developing what theatre can be.
I mean, this brings up something that I know is really important to a lot of people who are struggling with or wrestling with this idea. Is we're talking about methodologies, about online, live, but there's a a democratizing ownership that artists have always held in that liminal space, that unmeasurable, unquantifiable aspect that we all know in our DNA, which is between the artist and the space and the live, that is so nuanced and subtle. And with the move into these sorts of areas, the danger of everything becoming, or too much becoming, about the mechanizational mentality of how we structure and organize. Do anybody here have a sense yet in this issue of the hybrid question about, Vicky? Yes, go ahead and jump in.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just thinking, I think it's really important that we don't get stuck in the notion of either or with this, because what we're talking about is all of it. And when the pandemic is over, we will be making, I always want all of everything. And when the pandemic is over, we will all be making, hopefully, fantastic theatre that people will flood to, because they will want that experience where it is live, where we're sharing our sense of humanity and empathy in a room together with people that we haven't been together with. That is just who we are. That's why we go to the pub. That's why we tell each other stories. None of that is going to disappear. This is not going to reduce that at all. So we need to absolutely know that that is deep in our DNA as human. That's what makes us human. The issue, however, is that theatre has to evolve or it's over. It needs to move, it needs to respond to younger people, they need to be able to have control over it, all of these different things. And I was just thinking then about music, okay? Nothing beats a gig, does it? You know, Willie talked about, I've never been to Glastonbury, but I've watched it every single year. But nothing beats the experience of the musicians in front of you. But we've been buying records and CDs for years. And we're not doing that when I'm looking at the Pioneer, we're not doing that, saying we're doing that instead of the live. We still adore the live, and the live music is stronger than it's ever been. So we have to be able to find ways that really richly and inclusively and theatre aspires to be democratic, but it isn't democratic because you either can afford to go, all I've done my entire life is try to make theatre democratic, I have not achieved it. The digital form is something which can get closer to that and can bring people to those live experiences. Sorry, that was a bit overpassionate.
Fergus,
I just wanted to say, it's been interesting to us how lots of people who've been involved in our work have had to develop new sort of skills and talents this year, over the past year. So when we did our 20 Shots of Opera, we didn't engage any film directors or film actors. It was all the singers who we normally work with, a lot of the directors and creative teams from theatre, from opera, from areas like this, who all had to learn how to make something for film. And almost every one of them afterwards said to me, you know, how exciting it was to do something new and to challenge ourselves. And I think there is also an upside in terms of this move to digital, that we're all learning to tell the stories that we feel passionate about telling, and the performances that we feel passionate about giving in new formats and in new ways. And for us as a company, making work for film involves recording it from an audio point of view. So we're banking up lots of stuff, like lots of audio recordings, lots of film, lots of stuff that we would never have had, because our work in live performance is often quite ephemeral. It's gone, you know, once a few performances are over. I think there's been an interesting question in the chat about what that means for actors and also for singers in opera. You know, if you're giving one performance instead of 10, how you remunerate people properly for it. So that is a really interesting question, and it's something that I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg of dealing with. But I know that one of the upsides for the singers involved in our projects and for our directors is that they come away with these amazing digital assets, a recording of the work that they've done. So for the singers, lots of these recordings they've been able to showcase to agents and international opera houses and say, look at the quality of what we've done, and it's there. It's done to a really high level. And last thing I just wanted to say was on the business of course, we've had to hire people to make the films and people with equipment and all those people. But I think increasingly you have to look at those as part of your artistic family. If you find the right people that you want to work with, they're part of the family. And in opera, we have a sort of quite a broad family of singers, directors, creative teams, musicians, and now increasingly filmmakers and audio recorders and they're part of who we are now, and we have to regard them as such as well and make room in our budgets for them. Thanks.
Neil, is there anything you want to say? Ask a question. You know, a lot of artists here will be sitting thinking, you know, how many skills now do I have to take on? How whole new processes do I have to develop? But in some senses, maybe that is not necessarily the right question, because it's about working with people who know how to deliver the vision the artist is working with, rather than the artist feeling they have to become this magician across multiple platforms.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. That's been our experience, both for artists and for our technicians and stage management. It's like, we still absolutely need your skills, and your skills are pure and incorruptible and will live on. But there are other people who have different skills who we can work with. And I think, as Fergus has just said, you know, we've been working with a couple of film companies over the last year, and they've genuinely they're part of our artistic team. They're not just guns for hire who come in. And I think, in the same way that they're learning from theatre skills, I think theatre skills can learn. And we will be going back to live theatre. I know it's an awful time. And as it stretches out, it feels worse. And at the Abbey and other theatres, all of us who have funding, you know, it's our duty to keep finding ways to keep artists employed, and that's what we have to be doing. But the end game is we are going to be going back into our theatres in some stage, I would hope, at least by the end of this year, and certainly into next year. But yeah, I don't want it would be awful for people to think, well, hang on a minute, I've been a 25-year, 30, 40-year career actor. Do I now have to be a cameraman as well? No, you don't. We have people who will help you do that. Please be a brilliant actor, be a brilliant technician, be a brilliant stage manager. That's what we need.
Thank you, Neil. I think we're getting close to the breakout room, so I'll hand back over to, thank you everybody, and to all our speakers there for a very interesting setting the scene. Obviously, hundreds of questions, thoughts. There's going to be an attempt this afternoon to begin to dig into some specifics, and also continue to ask some provocative questions of ourselves and not take things for granted. So I hope you'll come back this afternoon. But before then, Anna and Irma, do you want to take over on terms of just some breakout room conversations?
Thanks a million, everybody. We so wish that we were all together right now and we were going to watch you all funnel out into the foyer for our coffees and our pastries and all that kind of stuff. But because we can't do that, what we're trying to do is to replicate a virtual foyer. So we're going to break up into breakout rooms now, around about 10 people. It's optional. You don't have to stay, but we'd love you to stay and chat. And so Sam, our fabulous colleague in the space, is going to divide everyone up. These will last for about 15 minutes, and then you'll come back at 11:45 for just a brief finish. And then our next session is at 12 o'clock. Thanks a million. Over to you, Sam.